Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about going back to crunching numbers in the 2020 presidential election. I did this spreadsheet around the time of the election, or shortly after the election, and came up with a variety of numbers and then saved it, but called the document something else or misnamed it somehow. I'd lost it when I was going through and doing a bit of housekeeping on the disk. I found that's where it went. And I'd recreated some of it from memory, but given how unlikely the outcome or the alleged outcome of the 2020 presidential election was, and how unbelievable it was, I took it upon myself to do some number crunching back in the day. So anyway, this is resurfaced, and I've just finished it off. It was only a few minutes to finish it off, and some of the information has come to light since, so I was able to factor that in. But I just took three swing states as an example, and there were I calculated that just on 11%, just a tad shy of 11% of the votes remained unverified. And when I say unverified, I'm talking about that there were nearly 20,000 dead people that voted. Now that's not enough to swing the election, by the way, but that's an unusual number of dead people to vote. Now, what's also unusual is the dead people all seem to vote for Biden. That seems implausible. If the dead people voted approximately 50-50, you'd go, oh, well, who cares? But given that the dead people voted overwhelmingly for Biden, then that's a problem. The next thing is the amount of unverified votes, in the sense of there's no chain of custody recorded, or there's a broken chain of custody. So the votes were picked up or collected from, for example, the voting booths, the voting areas, and or voting offices, but there was no recording of who picked it up and where it went or what happened. It goes somewhere else, again unverified. Then it arrives at the central counting collation centre. But without that chain of custody. Now, when there's a broken chain of custody like that, the votes, of course, are suspect. Now, again, the votes were overwhelmingly, those votes with the broken chain of custody were overwhelmingly for Biden. So again, if you were just any electoral officer or anybody, so hey, hold on a minute, these suspect votes happen to vote nearly all just for one candidate, not the other. Again, if they came in at approximately 50-50, these broken chain of custody votes, again, who would care? It's only the issue of that the protocols and the policies haven't been followed, which is a concern in itself. But that those suspect votes are overwhelmingly voting for just one candidate. So that you don't need to be a rocket scientist to say, well, hold on a minute, that's really suspicious. Let's look closely at that. But those sort of investigations just weren't done. Now, whether you look at, say, the state of, in my opinion, weren't done. You look at the state of Georgia or Pennsylvania, any of those, Arizona, any of those states. If you look at the amount of irregularities, you'd say, well, hold on, we've really got to look at this. We've really got to audit this closely and do a real close. But that was never done in any of those places. Those audits were never done. They recounted the existing votes, but didn't follow up the issue of the chain of custody or the signature matching, and because of that, those votes are still to this day unverified. The second thing, apart from the chain of custody issues, which was a big issue, just for example, just if you just look at broken chain of custody alone, that was 6% of the votes in question. So now that's easily enough to turn the election in. Look, if you just look, say 6% of the votes, and of those 6%, 90% were for Biden. and then you look at you then extrapolate the numbers back and say, even if you assume 50-50 of the distribution of votes, because they weren't all from Democrat strongholds necessarily. Even if you look at that, even if you look at, say, 60-40 for Biden or 65-35 for Biden, of those unverified votes, Trump would still have won those states. So that's the extent to which these votes are suspicious, or the vote outcome suspicious. So you've got just chain of custody verification alone, if they'd been either dismissed, or B, if the votes had not been 90% for Biden, and nowhere else do you see 90-10 type distribution of votes. So, or maybe in the black areas of DC or something, but outside of that, you just don't see it. So if you just look at those votes, either those votes were taken out, or they were, as in removed from the total because the chain of custody was broken, or you would go through detailed signature matching, things like that, verification of addresses and double counting of votes, these sorts of things, or somebody voting 2 or 3 times. So that alone is enough to change the election outcome. So this is very, very serious. Now the next thing is signature matching, particularly with the postal ballots. Signature matching just wasn't done. Now, it wasn't done when you had clutches of votes that, again, were overwhelmingly for Biden. So this is the problem I've got. It's okay, you don't signature match, but the votes are about 50-50 for each candidate. Well, that's probably about how it would be. And so you're looking, it's close to any, a vote counting reality or a distribution of voting patterns reality. I mean, you probably wouldn't bother that much. But the 2 issues together, signature matching was not done, and 90% of the votes were for Biden. It's the 2 together that create the real concern. And if these votes were legitimate, then what's the problem with doing a detailed forensic audit? I don't see what the problem is. Maybe it is. The will of the people is supreme, and I'm for one fully prepared to accept the will of the people. It means, however, I have to accept that candidates I don't like or I think have bad policies will win sometimes. I have to accept that. That's the acceptance I have of the democratic process. Sometimes the candidate I prefer or the policies I prefer won't get up. And that's the price you pay for the democratic process. But it's a price the globalists are not prepared to pay. Why should we fucking accept an election outcome that doesn't suit us? Why the fuck should we? And that's really, sums up their attitude. But there are some other things just just in one state alone, where the vote margin, the difference was like 10 or 11,000, and 25,000 people voted were at addresses that either didn't exist or where they're not at those addresses. Nearly 26,000. Now again, that's the margin, but again, of these strange phantom votes, they were nearly all for Biden. Again, you get that. That's why. Hey, hold on a minute. Why? So and one online guy did a spot check. I think they did 200. This is out of the 25,000. They did 200 spot checks, and most of the addresses didn't exist. They were vacant blocks of land, or they were addresses in where it was in an overpass or an underpass. They just weren't there. So how is it that there can be so many addresses there that don't exist? So the voter obviously doesn't exist. So how, again, were these 90% for Biden? Just in I think it was Georgia. I'm just going to follow my head. I think it was in Georgia. It might have been Arizona, but I think it was Georgia, where if you just counted the votes from the addresses that don't exist, and you just subtracted those, just as in the votes for Biden, then you swung that back to 50-50. There's just in that alone, there's over 8,000, minimum 8,000 illegitimate votes. But given that they're all addresses that don't exist and they're 90% Biden, then there's nearly 22 to 23,000 Biden votes there that are clearly not legitimate. And again, that would have swung the state to Trump. So when you go through this 11% now, that's just on 3 of the swing states, and I recorded it all. I could probably still go back and look at some of the other swing states, but that's, I just don't want to put the time into it. But that's the 11% of the votes were unverified, and around 90% of those votes were for Biden. Let's just be generous and say that 65% of the votes would have been for Biden. We'll just be really generous and say that's still of those votes, there's still enough that Trump would have won in all 3 states, even if you say those unverified votes were. But because the chain of custody wasn't observed, because the signature matching wasn't done, and because there was no follow-up and auditing and subtraction of votes from addresses that didn't exist, then the outcome that was very suspiciously, the very unlikely outcome that was suspiciously recorded at the time is the one that stood, and the court. None of the courts will intervene. The courts were too activist, and they seem to have been prepared well in advance to do what was required of them. And then the Supreme Court refused to buy into it or have anything to do with it, probably fearful of repercussions, I would think. Nor do they want to be, I think, a pawn in the overall political game that every election thereafter would be contested based on somebody just saw over not winning, rather than there being genuine malfeasance in the election processes. But I just wanted to sort of just indicate that now, if you then look at the amount, if you then multiply out across all the states the amount of suspicious votes, it comes to around 21 million, which is a view that I've held, that Biden in reality probably got about 60 million votes, diehard Democrats, that sort of thing, anti-Trumpers and so on. Probably got about 60 million votes, and I would say the Trump total of around 73 million. I think they decided not to make Trump votes drop down the back of the filing cabinet or get lost, or probably some did, but they decided to load up Biden's vote in order to, because they could control that apparatus more effectively. I think they thought that we can create fake votes, which much less scrutiny, and much more easily than we can get a lot of people just to trash the Trump vote. So I think they looked at both. Well, which will we do? Okay, it's easier to create the votes and hiding behind COVID and mail-in ballots and that sort of thing. Because if you take out the mail-in ballots factor and the fact that many of those were through a broken chain of custody or were signature not verified, and then that alone was enough to get a win to Biden. But the fact that they did 20 million votes means that they were probably little concerned that Trump would have done better than even 73 million. That would suggest they were really scared of how many votes Trump would get, and they wanted to just put it at beyond any sort of dispute or any concern or any doubt. No, we need to go big on this. We gave Hillary a few more million votes to help her, but it wasn't enough. This time we won't make the same mistake. 20 million, that's it. And I think that's what they did. But just looking at those swing states alone, if you look at there's nearly 2 million, just in 3 states, there's 2 million or so votes that were in effect curated into existence in order to make sure that Biden got up. And this is and of those, the fake votes were probably all of them. But it goes to show you how much work they put into it, how much money they spent, the infrastructure they must have put in place or did put in place, the amount of operatives they got on site, including, by the way, Republican operatives were brought on site. I mean, how are they bribed? How are they brought to fully sell out Trump as much as they did? And when they were selling out Trump, I think we're getting Trump, but no, sure, okay, but you're actually getting the will of the people. The people decide whether Trump is president, not you fucking lowlifes. So that's something that they can. No, we decide. The people deciding. You've got to be kidding. You've been a Tacitus today at your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.